Labor Day means many things to many people. Last long weekend of summer. Back to school. Cooler weather on the way. But a few people still believe it's about labor. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 14, Chapter 3,
Labor Day.
Let me address this right off the top. It's not relevant to the topic per se, but I know someone will point it out. I'm Canadian, love Canada, but I spell labor L-A-B-O-R, not L-A-B-O-U-R. I owe you R, but what am I? I have never been a fan of the superfluous U. Even in high school, the superfluous U preamble was part of every assignment I handed in. Dear teacher, I'm not using the superfluous Canadian U. If you mark me down for spelling, I will be appealing my grade to the Board of Education. They always did, and I never did. But I stand by my right to drop the U. If I hear a rumor that my favorite neighbor is painting his fence a new color, I don't question his behavior, only his spelling. Speaking of which, if I decide to go to the theater at the town center to see Spectre, I'm on the ER train, my friend, not R-E. No ridiculous R-E or unnecessary U for this Canadian, especially in the word labor. Think about this. Adding a U to labor is counterproductive. It involves a couple extra turns of the pen, an unneeded keystroke. You are adding another laborious task to the word labor. I contend that if you truly believe in and support labor, you must omit the U as a symbolic gesture. Leaving out the U is labor-saving. As I said, I'm a proud Canadian. I love what we're about. I don't mind that we have a constitutional monarchy with a governor-general, queens and kings on our money. But on this I side with those pissed-off Brits who 250 years ago formed a new England, and as they waved goodbye to Great Britain, said, hey, it's no longer about you. I'll never win this debate, but that doesn't mean I'll stop trying. So back to Labor Day. In North America, the first Monday of September, whereas in most of the rest of the world it coincides with International Workers' Day, May 1st. In most countries, even China, it's a holiday. As I said, it means a ceremonial end of summer, back to school. In Toronto and Vancouver, the end of the CNE and the PNE, respectively. The CNE Air Show, Black Monday closing riots. It means football will start soon, and of course, there's the Labor Day weekend mattress sale. Smart technology keeps my side cool and her side warm. 50% off ends Labor Day. Well, it's different things to different people. I think that it's more important than ever to at least take a moment and acknowledge the labor part of Labor Day weekend. A brief history for perspective. The world's first major industrial revolution began in the mid-1700s in Europe. Shortly after it began, captains of industry also started piecing together the United States. The first industrial revolution lasted a good 100 years. You can imagine the huge societal and cultural impact this had. Artisan and agricultural jobs quickly became factory jobs. By the mid-1800s, workers were organizing. They began to realize the power they had in numbers, the power to improve their terrible wages and working conditions. It was the birth of unions.
When they spoke in one voice, and they were heard, and they were one. That's what a union is.
The first Labor Day celebrations in the U.S. took place September 5th, 1882 in New York City. 10,000 workers marched in a parade organized by the Central Labor Union and the Knights of Labor. The International Federation of Labor formed a few years later. By 1894, U.S. President Grover Cleveland signed a congressional act into law making Labor Day a national American holiday. Canada was actually ahead of this curve. Remember I just said September 5th, 1882, the big labor march in New York City? Well, it was actually inspired by a huge labor demonstration in Toronto only weeks earlier in July of that year. A full 10 years before that, demonstrations in Toronto supporting striking printers galvanized labor unions. In Canada, that led to the Trade Unions Act, which confirmed the legality of labor unions. Canada inspired the American labor movement, and then the U.S. movement, in turn, inspired further Canadian union organization. They fed off each other. The same year that President Cleveland signed the act to confirm Labor Day, a bill in Canada to observe Labor Day passed and received royal assent. The only difference? We added a U. One would think that with over 150 Labor Days observed, the growth of labor unions, various labor acts and laws, that all would be well between labor and management. It's not. In some cases, it's worse now than it ever was. I said labor and management. It really is labor versus management. In general terms, I believe that you can never trust management, or corporate, to do the best on behalf of their employees. Labor is the biggest number listed under operating expenses. The corporate mantra has never changed. Cut your expenses to increase profit. Profit is good. Profit is not a sin. Corporate greed is. Corporate greed is the new pandemic. When corporate greed cuts expenses, labor suffers. Labor is, and let's be clear on this, men and women with jobs they use to support themselves and their families. It's how the economy works. One person's spending is another person's income. When more people spend more money on groceries, gasoline, and back-to-school supplies, we have a thriving economy. When you have fewer jobs and less money, and the rich get richer, we have a stagnant economy. Yacht sales may be up, but everyone else is hurting. Corporate cuts the expenses that you and I call labor. They want to replace them with machines or AI, or try and do the same job with fewer people, or just pay them less, or make them part-time so that they don't have to pay benefits. Sometimes they skimp on workplace conditions and safety. Job numbers come out every Friday, and most news media blindly reports them. I find that so frustrating. Job numbers are up, unemployment down, they say unquestioningly. You know what's on the rise in Canada? Part-time. Anywhere from 15 to 25% of people say they take a part-time job as a preference to having no job at all. Workers are at the mercy of corporate, who figured out that 100 part-time employees are way cheaper than 50 full-time, and they get away with it. No wonder job numbers are up, stupid media. The company looks like they just created 50 new jobs, when what they did was just added a bunch of people and cut everybody's time in half. Part-time. Remember this too, that just over one-tenth of the workforce is represented by a union. Everyone else is on their own. And even unions have to fight to get a fair shake for their workers. Strikes, lockouts, labor disruptions. In the last few years alone, labor unrest at John Deere, Frito-Lay, United Auto Workers, writers' strike, SAG-AFTRA actors, dock workers, rail workers, airline pilots, metro grocery workers, liquor store employees, teachers, doctors, nurses. And that's a partial list. And what are the usual demands? Fair wage, fair benefits, decent working conditions. You'd think in the 21st century those things would be a given. Apparently they are not. And hey, workers, if you don't like it, we'll just send the jobs somewhere else where they aren't such sticklers about things like wages and safety. Instead of the advancement of labor, we seem to be going in the other direction. As I said, the trend towards part-time jobs, no benefits, the rise in the gig economy, encouraging self-employment, and those companies fighting the organization of unions, for example, among rideshare employees. Donald Trump and Elon Musk openly joking about how Musk simply fired employees who threatened to strike. The United Auto Workers filed charges against Musk and Trump with the National Labor Relations Board because firing striking workers is against the law. The law. In the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, the Chamber of Commerce has requested that the government lower the minimum working age to 13. 13. And they're thinking about it. Hey, why don't you just put the kids back in the coal mines while you're at it? They want to get back to those Dickensian times so that the 1% can get even richer. And by the way, you know when Dickens lived and wrote about substandard living and working conditions? Yeah, those same mid-1800s, when labor was organizing, unions were forming, trying to stand up for a better life. Why do we seem to be going backwards? Let's not go back. Let's move forward. Mind you, in Great Britain, they recently elected into power the Labour Party. So maybe there's hope, although they are stuck with a superfluous U. Again, only 10 or 11% of the labor force is unionized. And as a union member, you have a darn sight better chance that corporate may deal with your issues. But even that's not a given. Corporate fights unions. You're going to strike? How about I lock you out first? The law does try and be fair to both sides. There are rules, collective bargaining, arbitration, sometimes even back-to-work legislation. Your job can be deemed an essential service. Never cared for that phrase. I mean, if your job is not essential, why is it even a job in the first place? When COVID was at its peak, people who worked in grocery stores and drove trucks and trains were called essential. They were called heroes, frontline people. A year or two later, grocery strike, rail strike, yeah, they're not essential. Good luck to you. I think the mistake we make, the difference between essential and not essential, is like the difference between important and urgent. It's all important, but what needs dealing with right now? Again, most of us are not unionized workers. I think in general terms, though, most workers support their unionized brethren. Sometimes it depends, and I'm generalizing, but when teachers and doctors go on strike, we seem to be less sympathetic toward them, as opposed to when auto workers and grocery employees go on strike. I'm speaking only Canada now, and admittedly, anecdotally, but I have mostly observed people being put out by a labor dispute, but still supporting the workers. Last year I couldn't get my groceries across the street, but I always gave the striking workers a thumbs up. I'd be stuck in traffic because of a labor march, but I always thought, gee, I hope these guys get a better deal. The rail dispute in Canada, very interesting. A dispute which disrupts a global supply chain, leading to higher prices in a time of inflation, and possibly even affecting our supply of safe drinking water. The government said, well, they're not essential, but then turned out and told them to get back to work while they were still bargaining. Binding arbitration, i.e., you must reach a deal. I certainly do not envy a labor minister's position here, especially if you're part of a pro-labor government. You're juggling a lot. You got a lot to consider. Outside of that, the game plays out. Management paints workers as unreasonable. Workers say companies place profit over people. I've been part of 2 unions in my life. Joining the union was actually a condition of employment. To work here, you need this union card, or on certain individual projects, at least a union permit. But I've never been on strike. It never came to that. But yet I still admire the people who do, the ones who man the picket lines and carry the message. One of the criticisms of unions, at least the bigger ones, is that they have become too big, almost like corporations unto themselves. I don't know, maybe that happened. Sounds more like fake news. Another thing often cited is labor unions' connection to organized crime, especially among some of the bigger unions in America. I'm sure you've heard that story, because remember, the birth of the American Labor Union was New York City. New York City, also the birthplace of American organized crime. Here's what allegedly happened. Labor organized in response to low wages and terrible working conditions. They formed unions. They held marches and even went out on strike. Corporate fought labor. It was corporate that had the connections to government and law enforcement. They called in their corporate favors, and police busted up the union rallies. Or if not, they would turn a blind eye to the hired freelance union busters. The unions had no counterforce until organized crime said, well, hey, we could be your police. Great, what do you want in return? Nothing. Nothing really. But hey, you do have big union dues bank accounts and union pension funds. How about you give us low or no interest loans so that we can build up big legitimate businesses and then pay you back? Not only that, as we build our businesses together, we can all decide what unions get which contracts. A marriage was consummated. It's like they were paying for protection, but not really. Is it still like that? It's hard to tell. The golden age of New York crime families has long passed. The racketeering laws are now much stronger, and so is their enforcement. Not that organized crime has gone away, it's just different. It has been said that a mob-run Las Vegas only lasted until the real crooks took over. The large corporations who learned their trade from the original mobsters. Believe me, I'm not saying all unions are run by organized crime, far from. I'm just pointing out some of the historical connections. Corporations are rich and powerful. Unions have to become rich and powerful to even stand a chance against them. Sometimes that much money corrupts. That's all I'm saying. You know, some days I feel like there's only two kinds of people in the world: the crooks who get away with it and the crooks who don't. But on my brighter, more positive days, I do hope that it all turns out well for the worker. The worker. That is most of us. Baseball, apple pie, and labor unions. They are all about as American as you can get. Every time there's an election, a candidate may seek the official support of the unions. You know why? Because union members vote. And remember this, politicians do not talk to the people. They talk to the people who vote. The difference that we've seen in the last couple of decades is that a political endorsement from the head of a union doesn't necessarily carry the vote of the union with it. The union president may say, vote for candidate A, but the rank and file may vote for B instead. Never used to be like that, but it is now. It's odd. Conservative politicians are often the loudest at claiming they are for the people, but by and large they are anti-union, pro-management, pro-business. Speaking of by and large, Doug Ford, just large, not by. We get about 8 or 9 long weekends a year. We should get one per month, but corporate always objects. You want me to give my workers a paid day off? I can't afford that. Yeah, actually you can. In Ontario years ago, they decided the third Monday of February would be Family Day, a long weekend. But after business pressure, they made it optional. Some companies don't even honor it. I worked for Bell Media. They constantly preached work-life balance, but they didn't give us Family Day. A couple of our long weekends are religious, Christian, of course, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, etc. Sorry, you got to take a vacation day. We got New Year's, we've got the Queen's birthday, we've got the country's birthday, a weekend in August just because, and we get a day off to say thanks. Outside of the social and family obligations of these long weekends, not a lot is expected of us. Just take a day off. Don't work. Labor Day, though. Maybe we should make more of an effort to acknowledge labor, union or otherwise. You know, because a lot of people have to work in order for the rest of us to have a day off. Hey, I'm not saying cancel the trip to the cottage, skip the barbecue, or get up early to attend a parade. Just maybe a quiet thank you, a silent 20-second prayer for labor. A little love for labor could be your labor of love.
Great news. Yeah, the strike's been settled. I'm going back to work. We've been on strike for 12 years.
Your demands.
$5.35 an hour, and that's what they're paying now.
I believe that's the new minimum wage.
And now you know who to thank for that. All right, I gotta go.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.